And there was never this, there was never this no boots on the ground. I don't know where this keeps coming from.
Well, yes.
There was no, there wasn't. There was
What?
I will not put American boots on the ground in Syria.
Don't you think it is important to give a specific list of hospitals that you're accusing Russia of hitting? Those are grave accusations.
I'm not making those accusations. I'm telling you, we've seen reports from credible aid organizations that 5 hospitals and a clinic,
Which
at least
hospital?
one
in
clinic.
what cities, at least?
You can go look at the information that many of the Syrian relief agencies are putting out there publicly. We're getting our information from them too. These
But
reports,
you're citing those reports without giving any specifics.
because we believe these agencies are credible, and because we have other sources of information that back up what we're seeing from
Well,
some of these reports. And you know what? Why don't
If
you
you
ask? Here's a good
Exactly.
question. Why don't
That's
you
what
ask your defense ministry
That's what I
what
would-
they're doing,
If you give
and
a
see if you
specific
can
list,
get? No.
If you give
no.
a specific list of hospitals,
No.
my colleagues who are
I'm
listening
supposed to-
hopefully would be able to go and ask Russian officials about a specific list of hospitals that
You
are
work for
accusing
Russia Today, right? Isn't
That
that your
is
agency?
correct.
And so,
Yes.
why shouldn't you ask your government the same kinds of questions that you're standing here asking me?
When you're
Ask
leveling-
them about their military activities. Get them to tell you what, or
When
to
I
deny
ask
what
for
they're doing.
specifics, it seems your response is, why are you here? Well, you are leveling that accusation.
No,
And
ma'am.
if you give specifics,
No,
my
ma'am.
colleagues would be able
No,
to
ma'am.
ask Russian
Once
officials.
again, you're just wrong. I'm not leveling those accusations. Relief agencies that we find credible are leveling those accusations. So
But
why
you
don't you
agree with
question
that.
them about their information and where they're getting it? And why don't you question your own defense
Which
ministry?
organization?
No.
If you give a specific list of hospitals,
No.
my colleagues who are
I'm
listening
supposed to-
hopefully would be able to go and ask Russian officials about a specific list of hospitals that
You
are
work for
accusing
Russia Today, right?
Wait, hold on. Please be careful about saying your defense minister and things like that. I mean, she's a journalist, just like the rest of us are. So it's, she's asking pointed questions, but they're not,
From a state-owned,
But
from a
they're-
state-owned,
but they're not-
from a
but they're-
state-owned outlet,
but they're
Matt,
not-
from a state-owned
the
outlet
questions
that's
that
not
she's asking
independent.
are not out of line.
I didn't say the questions were out of line.
Okay.
I didn't say
mean,
the questions were out
all
of
right,
line.
Okay,
But I'm not,
Oh, no, I understand.
I'm
but
sorry,
asking-
but I'm not gonna put Russia Today on the same level with the rest of you who are
Well- Do
you have
representing
an issue with my
independent
question?
media
Well, hold
outlets.
on, but look, there, well, we can talk about this later offline, but, just, the question is not an inappropriate question to ask.
Didn't say that it was,
All right,
but I also think it should be asked of their own defense ministry,
Okay.
which they don't do, which Russia Today doesn't do.
Well, you are leveling that accusation.
No,
and
ma'am.
if you give specifics,
No,
my
ma'am.
colleagues would be able
No,
to
ma'am.
ask Russian
Once
officials.
again, wait a minute, wait. We have 3,000 some odd troops in Iraq already in an advise and assist capacity at bases throughout the country. Don't tell me, and don't tell them or their families that they're not on the ground. They are very much on the ground.
Resolution we've submitted today does not call for the deployment of U.S. ground combat forces to Iraq.
He also used that phrase, that its army, meaning Russia's army, on NATO's doorstep. Why is that? Is it not logical to look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not
But-
the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded, and,
Okay.
and the
So
expansion
the
has
reason-
been a good thing for.
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to,
I'm
moved
pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern
Well, I'm pretty
cities.
sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
It's not
Okay.
changed, but I'm
So,
pretty sure the movement by Russia is
has
Russia's
NATO,
decision.
if NATO has moved east, The reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved, not
NATO
because.
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Unfortunately, for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand
Union
it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border, while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive
Fair
alliance.
enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a
It has
fact.
expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But
And so
there's
the
no reason
reason-
for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia, yet you're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel
We're
said.
blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the
Okay,
security
which is
situation
not a
inside
NATO
Europe.
member, which is not a NATO member.
Here at the State Department, the Secretary is still committed to a diplomatic solution. There are other options that don't revolve around the act of diplomacy.
Looking at the events that followed the ceasefire, how is it fair to say that Russia is solely responsible for the failure of this deal?
Because, and we've said this many, many times, they have influence on Assad. I didn't make that
Are you
up.
saying that you don't have influence with the rebels?
We do. And so do some of our allies and partners as well.
And if the U.S. does have influence with these rebel groups, why the hundreds of ceasefire violations? Why did that happen?
We have influence over some, not all. We have
The second largest rebel group just refused to abide by that
there
deal.
are other nations that have influence. Here at the State Department, the Secretary is still committed to a diplomatic solution.
So with the additional steps I ordered last month, we're speeding up training of ISIL forces, including volunteers from Sunni tribes in Anbar province. In terms of our support of opposition groups inside of Syria, I made very clear early on that the United States couldn't impose a military solution on Syria either, but that it was in our interest to make sure that we were engaged with moderate opposition inside of Syria, because eventually Syria will fall. The Assad regime will fall. And we have to have somebody who we're working with that we can help pick up the pieces and stitch back together a cohesive, coherent country. And so we will continue to support them.
We're continuing to communicate right now, but I'm not getting any answers, and no one else is here. So what does that mean? Continue to communicate? Have
It
you or
means
have
that
you
we are
not
cooperating
given
with
any
them and
information?
assisting them
Does
in their
that-
efforts. I'm not going to get
does
into
that
the
mean
details
that
of
you-
what that is.
But that answer means nothing, though. Have you given them information, data, what any kind?
I've answered the question.